So your bass guitar sounds boring in your recordings. Here's one way we can fix that. Hi, I'm Carmine, a music producer, composer, and bass player, and I just want to give you a couple little tips that I like to use to make my bass sound more interesting when recording. I like to use a tone and sound that is inspired by synths and synth bass. I love a good old traditional bass guitar tone, but there's something more interesting, especially in today's pop and contemporary hip hop R&B style music, that is inspired by technology. I find that you can add the right recipe of plugins to your bass playing to get it to sound more like a synth bass without having to take away this skill and this thing you like to do in playing electric bass guitar. Your fingers on the strings of a guitar has a certain expression that you kind of can't quite get when you're hitting keys. There's just something interesting about bending notes and being able to fluctuate that way between notes that you can't get on a keyboard. Playing bass was one of the first things that got me into music and into recording. So over the years, I've just sort of shaped different sounds inspired by the music I was listening to discover how to get that human expression out of my fingers while also getting a tone that was a little more fun. For sake of example, we'll go with this. First, I'm going to add some basic compression, maybe about 3 dB of compression, to just make sure I'm controlling the signal. I have a nice sound that maybe has a little bit of a volume and personality boost to it, but is just being controlled, isn't peaking. Basic stuff. Then I like to add some sort of distortion after that. After the distortion, I like to add some sort of phaser. I used to use a ring shifter back in the day. Maybe it's a flanger, chorus, something to add a little depth and swirl to the sound, and that kind of mimics an oscillator on a synthesizer. Now that you have that depth, I then take it to space and add a little bit of reverb on there. The reverb kind of acts as your decay or like a filter ladder on a synth, and you can kind of control how long the reverb is or how short the reverb is. That combination of sounds to me, capped off with the reverb being put behind those other 3 plugins, allows you to get this sort of personality that you would find on all the controls of analog synth. From there, you can be pretty selective about the way you want to EQ things, either before or after any of those plugins. If I'm going for something that's a little more cut off and low, maybe I'll cut some high end at the end of that chain. And if I want something that's maybe a little bit of a higher part, I'll do that in reverse and I'll cut some low end, so we're just really getting the high frequencies of the bass. I think bass guitar is a lot more versatile than people seem to give it credit for. I like to play a lot of lead lines, a lot of fills, and a lot of things on recordings in the background on these higher strings. So the first example is basically those things I just listed out, but in the low end. It gets you this heavy, thick, dark sound, reminiscent of an 808, a Moog bass, or a Prophet bass patch in the low end. The next thing I like to do is a bit more of an ambient, high-end, sustained bass part. I'll go all the way up past the 12th fret somewhere on the D string, and I will just I'll sort of just like strum the crap out of it as much as I can. Typically, what you hear from people mixing using plugins, you don't want to overdo the reverb. Well, in this context, you do. You want the reverb to be completely oversaturated, and you want those sort of picks there and those strums. You want that attack to be almost lost. So really, you're just getting this sustained thing, almost like holding down a note on a synth that has a long decay. I use this for a lot of different melodies, a lot of different background ambient stuff, and it's one of my favorite sounds, especially when you couple it with a phaser or a chorus. It really adds this swirly depth to things that sometimes can sound like strings, can sound like analog synths. You can get it to sound almost like horns if you do like some slide up sorts of things. You're not really going to do this as the main low end thing holding down your track, but it's such a great tool. Sounds a little thicker than a guitar doing a lead line. and still higher than typically you would expect a bass guitar to be. Yeah, so those are a couple interesting things you can do with your electric bass guitar to just add more personality, more depth to your track, and just not have it sound boring and like a basic bass plugged into a DI. If you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe and leave me a comment down below if I can touch on any other subjects. I really like bringing some sort of versatility and unique quality to playing bass, and that's the goal here with the channel. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.